All right, so let's see if you can figure out the answer to this algebra equation. So what we have here is 4 over m plus m is equal to 5. Now, at first glance, this may seem to be a pretty simple equation, but actually there is a good amount of work here to solve for the variable m. Now, feel free to use a calculator, but if you think you have the right answer, put that into the comment section. I'm going to show you the correct solution in just 1 second. Then, of course, I'm going to solve this equation step by step. But we do have a multiple choice question here, and let's take a look at our answers. So m is equal to a, which is 8, b, which is 6 and negative 3, c, which is 1/9, and d, which is 4 over 1. All right, so let's take a look at the solution. The correct answer here is m is equal to d, which is 4 and 1. Now, if you got this right, well, you definitely get a happy face and an A plus. If you're like, hey, Mr. YouTube Math Man, I don't know how to solve this equation. I just kind of figured out that D must be the right answer. Well, if you picked up on that, that is fantastic because D must be the right solution. Now, why is that? Well, if M is equal to 4 or M is equal to 1, well, these solutions work. So for example, if I replace this m with a 1 and this m with a 1, well, I have 4 divided by 1, which is 4 plus 1. So 4 plus 1 is 5. So if you use the solutions to kind of reverse engineer and pick the right solution, well, that is excellent, all right? And for those of you that still have to take tests and you have an equation problem on some sort of an exam that is multiple choice, well, 9 times out of 10, you can use those solutions to identify the right answer. But for some of you out there, like, hey, Mr. YouTube Math Man, what if we don't have a multiple choice question? How do you do this problem? Well, as I indicated, there is a good amount of work. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and get into this right now. Okay, so let's talk about the first step. So, on our journey to find the answer to this equation, to solve this equation, there's two starting moves that we can take. Okay, now here we have some sort of fractions going on. For one step, okay, you can see on this side, I have one approach and then we have another approach. They're basically going to lead to the same point in the problem. And then we're going to take a look at another phase of another phase of the problem. But you can look at this problem right here. You can say, you know what? I don't want to deal with the fractions. I got 4 over m plus m equals 5. So anytime you have fractions in an equation, okay, you can always get rid of the fractions by multiplying the entire equation by the LCD, the lowest common denominator. So if we look at this thing, we have 4 over m over 1, okay, its denominator is 1, and 5 over 1. So what is the LCD? Well, it's going to be all these prime factors are m times 1, which is going to be, of course, m. So anytime you want to get rid of fractions in an equation, you can multiply the entire equation by the LCD and you will clear the fraction. So in this case, it will be m. I can multiply it by this, multiply it by that term, and multiply it by 5, and you can clear the fractions. Now, that's going to be one approach, and that's a good approach to take as well. Okay, there is another way to look at this problem, and this is this approach over here to the right. What you could do is you could say, you know what, let me just go ahead and start adding these fractions up. All right, let's just add these fractions up and see where that takes us as well. And I'm going to do this on this side. Okay, we're actually going to add up the fractions. Here on this side, we're going to use the LCD to clear. So let's take a look at the LCD strategy first. And this is a pretty easy way to clear this fraction. So let's go ahead and focus on each term. We're going to take m and we're going to multiply it by 4m first. Okay, so m, or m over 1, times 4m. What happens? The m's cross cancel. You're left with 4. Okay, hopefully you could see that. So that is the result of m being multiplied by 4 over m. What about m times m? Easy, right? We had 4 here. That'll be m squared. And then m times 5 is 5m. So this is super easy to get to this stage of the problem, okay? And we'll talk about what to do next here in a second. But let's suppose you wanted to add these two rational expressions, these fractions together right here. Well, one great way of doing this is using what I call the bow tie method. It's a nice little hack. First of all, you should hopefully know how to add rational expressions. If you know how to add rational expressions, um, you're going to come up with the same answer. Okay, so you can see the LCD here is m. So I can multiply this by m, multiply by this by m. I would again get an m squared up here, and then I can add the numerators. Or you could just go like this. Here is the specific pattern of one of the best shortcuts in mathematics when it comes to adding and subtracting fractions. So I'm going to show it to you right now. You start from the bottom right. Of course, I have to have this m expressed as a fraction. So instead of having just m like this is the problem. I'm going to put it over 1 so I have my denominator nice, and obvious right there. So you start from the bottom right and you multiply this way. 1 times 4 is 4. Now this is an addition problem. The second step is you're going to start from the bottom left. You're going to multiply this way. M times m is m squared. And then you're going to put that over. This forms the numerator. You're going to put this over this denominator times this denominator. M times 1 is m. Okay, so whether you use this as LCD or like, oh, the LCD is m, and I'm going to multiply this by m and that by m, you're still going to get to the same point in this problem. Now, at this stage, you're saying, well, this, I'm still, dealing with fractions. Well, what you can do, or, hopefully kind of see this, is that we have here basically a proportion. I can write this number 5 as 5 over 1. And now I have one fraction equaling to one fraction, okay? Let me just show you real quick here. If I have 1/2 and that's equal to another fraction, let's say 3/6. If you have two equal fractions, right? This fraction is equal to this fraction. It's also equal to a ton of fractions. It doesn't make a difference. If you have two equal fractions, the cross product is always true. So this times this is 6, right? 1 times 6 is 6, and 2 times 3 is 6, okay? So 6 is equal to 6 right there. That's an illustration of the cross product. So that's only the case when you have one fraction equaling to another exact fraction, not three fractions, okay? Just one fraction equaling to one fraction. This is what we have here, okay? Although we do have some expressions here. This is one numerator, one denominator, one numerator, one denominator. So we can go 1 times this is 1 times 4 plus m squared. That's just 4 plus m squared. And then I have m times 5 is 5m. So what occurred here? Well, what occurred is basically two paths to get to the same point, okay, in the problem. 4 plus m squared is equal to 5m, and 4 plus m squared is equal to 5m. So if you took this path or this path, doesn't make a difference. You're going to end up at the same place. But it's good to know different strategies, okay, because you might say, oh, I always do my problems this way, but we're looking at clearing the fractions with the LCD. This was a lot easier, actually, right, to get to this point in the problem. Okay, so let's go to pick this thing up now. So we have 4 plus m squared is equal to 5m. So I asked you, or I told you earlier, I said, yeah, the original problem is kind of like a rational equation, but this is going to morph into another type of equation. So what type of equation is this here? This is a quadratic equation, okay? We have a polynomial. The highest power of this polynomial is 2, okay? So hopefully you know something about quadratic equations. Let's just review very quickly some big picture points that you need to know about quadratic equations. So one is you need to be able to recognize a quadratic equation, which is a degree 2 polynomial, or something where you have a variable to the highest power of 2. That's kind of a simple way to explain this. So what do we know about quadratic equations? Well, the first thing is all quadratic equations, every single one of them, will always have two solutions, okay? Now, how do you solve quadratic equations? Now, there's basically three primary ways, and it all depends upon the type of quadratic equation we're dealing with, okay, its form, okay, the way it looks. You can have this is a quadratic equation. X squared is equal to 16, okay, because this is a degree 2 polynomial, right, a polynomial of the second power. Now, this particular equation doesn't have a middle term. In other words, x squared plus x is equal to 16, all right? So quadratic equations don't have to have that middle term. They have to have the highest power term. So if you have a quadratic equation in this form, you could easily just take the square root of both sides, okay? Now, if you have a trinomial situation like what we're going to have here in a second, you want to attempt to factor, okay? But let's just make sure we're clear. You're not going to be able to solve every single problem by taking the square root of both sides. Only those problems that are set up to solve in that manner. Okay, so if you can't take the square root of both sides, like in this particular problem, well, you're going to want to try to factor that quadratic trinomial, okay? But guess what? Not every quadratic trinomial is factorable. So, where does that leave us? Well, every single quadratic equation can always be solved by the quadratic formula, okay? So you definitely need to know the quadratic formula, but you don't use the quadratic formula on every single problem, only the ones you need to use the quadratic formula. And by the way, there is another method out there called completing the square, which is pretty awesome as well. You definitely need to know all this stuff if you're taking any sort of algebra course. But completing the square is kind of like a long version of doing a quadratic formula. And actually, it kind of sets up a scenario where you're taking the square root of both sides. But don't want to get too much into that because the completing the square is not like a kind of a primary technique to solve quadratic equations. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this thing right now. And before you do anything, when it comes to quadratic equations, if you have that middle term, i.e. M or x, wherever we had x squared and x, if you have something in the middle, right, you're going to have a number. In this case, it would be 4. So if you have a trinomial situation, you want to get everything to the left-hand side of the equation. You want to set it equal to 0. That's called writing the equation in standard form. So we're going to put this thing to highest to lowest power. So m squared is first. We're going to subtract this 5m from both sides of the equation. In other words, we're going to scoot it over to the left-hand side. So we're going to get a minus 5m, and then we'll have our 4 right there. So right here, we have this quadratic equation in standard form, highest to lowest power. Okay, so and let me just show you the general form of that. Ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. And for those of you that are familiar with the quadratic formula, hopefully all of you are, your a, b, c values right here would come from your trinomial written in standard form. It's the coefficients, as you can kind of see them here, okay, in this respective pattern. But we're not going to need the quadratic formula for this particular problem because we're going to attempt to factor this trinomial. And guess what? This trinomial can be factored, okay? We can factor this. And again, it's going to depend upon your ability to know what factoring is and how to factor. I would say in algebra, probably one of the most important skills that you need to truly understand. There's a ton of super important skills, but probably one of the most important is factoring. If you cannot factor in algebra, you're not going to be successful in algebra. So let's take a look at. Now, before we continue on, I have a quick question for you. Are you enjoying this content? Well, if you are, please consider hitting that subscribe button. This really does help me out on YouTube. And if you're going to do that, hit that bell notification as well. I will definitely appreciate that. Also, if you need additional help in math, check out my math courses. You can find links to those in the description of this video. Also, I'm going to give you some specific recommendations at the end of this video. All right, so let's get back to the problem. M squared minus 5m plus 4. If I told you, here's the problem, factor the trinomial, or can the trinomial be factored? The factors are this, m minus 4 times m minus 1. Now, if you don't know how to factor, you want assistance with factoring, I'm going to give you a couple of quick suggestions right now on all of this, okay? One, I would direct you towards my Algebra 1 course in my Math Help program, okay? So that's my first primary recommendation because I really have formal kind of instruction complete, and I go over tons of different types of problems. So that's my first recommendation for you. Two, I have a lot of videos on my YouTube channel that go into factoring and rational equations, quadratic formula, all that stuff as well. But what you need to understand is that we can factor this trinomial into these two binomials. So the answer here, the factors, is m minus 4 times m minus 1. If you don't know why this is, you definitely need to review factoring trinomials and just factoring in general. And we can kind of check this as well, because if I use the FOIL method, first, outer, inner, last, in other words, if I multiply these together, I would get m times m is m squared, then m times a negative 1, that would be negative m, negative 4 times m, that would be negative 1m, by the way, that previous one, negative 4 times m right there, I would get negative 4m, and then I would get negative 4 times a negative 1, which is a positive 4. I would get back to this trinomial, okay? So hopefully you know how to multiply binomials, and don't just say, okay, I'm totally confused. Yeah, I don't really understand this. Anything you don't really totally get with what I'm explaining and you are trying to learn algebra, you need to go back and review this. All right, so let's take a look at why factoring is so awesome. So here is our problem. We have our trinomial set equal to 0, but we were able to factor this trinomial. So we have this thing times this thing is equal to 0. So think of it this way. I have one thing times another thing is equal to 0. If I have something like A times B and it's equal to 0, two different variables, right? If I say, hey, let's say I was walking down the street and I say, hey, listen, I have these two numbers and I just know when I multiply them together, the answer is 0. Can you tell me something about these numbers? You'd be like, well, okay, well, if you're multiplying two numbers together and the answer is 0, well, the only way that can happen is if one of the numbers is 0 or both of the numbers is 0. And this is what we call the zero product property, okay? This is why factoring is so cool. So if I have m minus 4 times m minus 1, guess what? This thing or both of these things must be 0 because this times this is equal to 0. So we're going to set both of these equal to 0 and solve for m. So that's the next step. And actually, it's the final step to solve this quadratic equation. So we have m minus 4 is equal to 0, and m minus 1 is equal to 0. And so now we're going to go ahead and add 4 to both sides. We get m is equal to 4, and then here we add 1 to both sides. M is equal to 1. Now, at this point in the problem, we are done. But because this is a rational equation, we need to check these solutions, okay? Because you could possibly end up with what we call extraneous solutions. It's always a good idea to check your solutions, and this is really not an optional thing. So let's go ahead and verify that, in fact, we don't have any extra solutions, because anytime you're multiplying by both sides of the equation by a variable, which we did over here, okay, you could create extraneous solutions. So let's go back up to our original problem and check this real quick because we don't want to make any errors. Okay, so we have m is equal to 4 and m is equal to 1. So we're just going to put these values in one at a time and see what we get. So let's plug in 4 for m. So this will give us 4 over 4 plus m, it'll be 4 right here. Is that equal to 5? Well, what's 4 divided by 4? 4 divided by 4 is 1. 1 plus 4, is that equal to 5? Well, 1 plus 4 is 5. 5 is equal to 5. That is a true statement. So that is a good solution. Let's go ahead and check m is equal to 1 and see what we get there. Okay, so here for this m, we're going to plug in 1 and see what we get. So we're going to get 4 over 1 plus 1. Is that equal to 5? Well, 4 divided by 1 is 4 plus 1 is 5. Is 4 plus 1 equal to 5? Yes, 5 is equal to 5. That's true as well. So that is a good solution as well. Okay, so I hope this video helped you out. And if that's the case, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, if you need additional help in algebra, check out these courses right here. So pre-algebra is for those of you that are studying basic algebra. But if you are further along in mathematics, then you may want to check out my Algebra 1 or Algebra 2 courses. Now, my Math Skills Rebuilder course is a review course. I cover basic math, algebra, and geometry in this course. I'm going to leave links to all these courses in the description of this video. All right, so with all that being said, I definitely wish you all the best in your math adventures. Thank you for your time and have a great day.